Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the AIPG Lunch and Earn webinar for March. I'm Aaron Johnson, Executive Director of AIPG, and I would like to welcome you to this morning or this afternoon's webinar, depending on exactly where you might be located. Just a couple of quick bookkeeping things before we get started. First, if you need CEUs for this and you're not in the state of New York, the CEU certificate will go directly to the email address that you used to register for the webinar. If you are in New York, it's just a reminder that the New York State Education Department requires that we offer some sort of an assessment. So at the end of the webinar, you'll need to take a 5-question multiple choice quiz. You need to get 4 out of 5 correct. You can take it as many times as you like. It will be open for about 30 minutes. You'll find that link in the chat to this webinar. So make sure you locate the chat. We'll let you know that we've dropped the link into the webinar chat when that quiz is ready. With that out of the way, it's my pleasure today to introduce Steve Stokowski as our speaker. Steve is the owner and materials geologist for Stone Products Consultants. His primary professional interests are aggregates and concrete petrography, and he has extensive experience, both geological and petrographic, from sites across the United States. Steve has a master's degree in geology from the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology and a BS in geology from George Washington U. Steve has really given a lot back to AIPG as the treasurer of the Atlanta section. He's also the 2014 recipient of the Herbert C. Hoover Award from the Washington, D.C. section of the Society for Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration. You know them better as SME. He also received the 2017 Robert W. Pecars Award from SME and is the past chair of the Industrial Minerals and Aggregates Division of the Society. He is registered or certified as a geologist in Georgia, Indiana, Maine, Virginia, and several other states. I personally have come to value Steve's counsel when it comes to understanding some of the challenges that face our profession, especially in the aggregates industry. So it is my pleasure to introduce him today. Steve, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. You can probably see my screen. Is that true? We know that? Yes, okay. The Good afternoon. This is Boston. This is Boston from looking north to south, and that's the Charles River you can see, and there's the Museum of Science right straddling the Charles. This is what notice a lot from ground level. This is part of the Big Dig. And the Big Dig was a multi-billion-dollar construction project, and 5 billion in 1998. Today, because of inflation, it would cost almost 26 billion, and that's inflation adjusted. On the right side there is the Leonard Zakin Bridge. It's an eccentric cable stayed bridge, and particular state section required huge amounts of geological work to happen. Boston has many unstable in geologic environments for bridge abutments and roads and tunnels, all of which were included in the dig. Boston is a big city, but it's not the biggest city in the United States. It really is only the 11th. It's equal to Phoenix or to Los Angeles, Long Beach area in California. The Boston area is really eastern Massachusetts. Western Massachusetts often isn't considered part of Boston from in the people in. Now Boston has multiple beltways. If you travel to Maine, you would often go through Boston proper and go up this way. That's my pointer there. There's another route over here, which goes up to New Hampshire, and then you can cut Maine. There's basically those are routes which go through the suburbs of Boston. Here's the first beltway. Here's the second beltway, part of the beltway which extends down to Providence and it goes up and almost deadheads in Leominster. Boston, hey, Boston has a lot of development. Was made. Old Main Land as 1795, but in the 1860s, which is the Civil War area, they made a huge investment in Makeland and Back Bay. Now the reserves in Boston, many of them are old, some are newer because of purchases, but they're vertically integrated, which is different than in the South, where you have Vulcan Materials, particularly, which usually is not vertically integrated. What I mean by vertically integrated is that they have concrete plants or blacktop plants producing to feed those plants. But there were also contractors who started off in sand and gravel pits, and they later became what's locally called ledge rock quarries. So you have a major sand and gravel resources up there that were essentially mined out. And these are high quality sand and gravel, uh, glacial deposition. Uh, Often you had excavations, and usually the grade for this was all ledge rock, but sometimes it's on till, which results in very great difficulties for making a ledge rock quarry until you go through the till. There were also a lot of rock quarries, and they started off as the dimension stone. So they're not crushed stone quarries. They were dimension stone quarries, and they're hillside quarries and deep pit quarries. And hillside quarries, the big advantage of those are that they're free. The deep pit quarries have an advantage for dimension stone in that you can set up cranes and go to great depth with hauling material out. They much of an advantage for aggregate quarry. There's a lot of the uh, locations around where there were and mining operations. This is just some of them in eastern Massachusetts. We have a history of adaptive reuse. Here you can see that some of the are this major sand and gravel deposits, and then when you go further north, you have clay and what on the coastal areas, which extends up into through New Hampshire and Maine, and results in problems. And you can see in the center too. This is the Boston area. This here is Plymouth. This Cod down here. No, Cape Cod is a moraine, so trail is very mixed. Up in this area, is a lot of sand, so you don't have large boulders. You have sand that was pushed out of this area and then redeposited down here at the end of the glacial times. Then you have mixed moraines. Some are very coarse material, and other ones are sand. And then you have this whole area over here, which is reworked, redeposited along the. With this clay up here, it's the Boston blue clay, uh, and it's also underneath Boston and erratic between rock and blue clay. This results in major geotechnical issues, and it resulted in Carl Terzaghi and Arthur uh, located in Boston really just to solve this problem for geotechnical applications. Most of the sand was at Eskers and Cames. Now, in many parts of the country, you don't hear about cames, but cames are really deposited along the edge of stagnant ice. and they're deep, usually sand and gravel deposits. They may have buried ice blocks in them, which when they melt result in kettles. But there also can be cames within fractures in the ice and stagnant ice, and they result in deposits out in the middle of a valley, often little hills and whatnot. Now the eskers formed underneath, but both of these kinds of deposits tend to coarse gravel, and locally it's called bony gravel. The Now the deposits that are cane terraces often are mixed sand and gravel and fine sand, which is deposited in the lake. That fine sand is very useful for construction aggregate. Historic to modern Boston, it really had changes. You can see in this uh, set of maps, the oldest map is on the bottom right. The current Google map is on the top, and showing the fill areas is on the lower left. And the light green is the fill areas. So there were a lot of islands, and Boston would not be the size it was if they hadn't filled around those islands. Now, here's the Back Bay area right here. But there's also other areas where there's been fill of different kinds. This was mostly sand and gravel fill because they were mining this during the Civil War. A lot of these other areas are filled from dredging or excavations within the city, or even construction rubble. But perhaps of interest, this area is Logan Airport. You see it being outlined on the lower left, and up here, that's Logan Airport. There was a study several years ago called the New England Governors Conference. They were attempting to define all the areas where there would be sand and gravel available for future construction needs in Boston. This was done in 1991. And they defined this whole area as a major sand and gravel deposit in Boston, Logan Airport. And the reason it was defined that way was because their GIS program, the way they wrote it, it was sand and gravel. It was completely surrounded by water. So it was an error, and that was in the final report. Reports weren't done by geologists. One of the first things that happened in Boston was this island, which was where Boston proper was, had three mounds in it. Now these were really caves on this island made of till and edges. But these uh, islands were called Tri-Mount, and then they put a basically a lighthouse on the top of them to signal shipping. And that was then subsequently removed to provide more made land in the Boston area. So that was really removed with ox cart and oxen. And you can see some of the illustrations in the next. You can see the exaggerated illustration at the bottom. But you can see some illustrations from contemporary artwork where they were excavating this. Now this is where the seat of government is in Massachusetts, which is on the lower left of this image. Now in the 1860s, it was a major mining project in the Boston area to make land for additional development and buildings and housing. And this took sand and gravel from the Needham and Dedham area, which you can see on the lower left at the end of the Arrow, and by rail it was railed to Back Bay in Boston, and it filled in an area that was on the right in here, which was really full of stagnant water and was a major problem for health in the area. But it also had it supplied some land for filters, for reservoirs, and some for roads. Uh, this used what was Charles Railroad, and they built that specifically for this. And you can see the number of cars. These are small rail cars and steam shovels. It took them 15 years to do it, and it increased the city from 783 acres to 1,829 acres. But it had a real advantage for people in the Boston area who were connected in that if they worked on this rail project during the Civil War, they were exempt from being drafted to go fight in the South. So this was a prime to be in this project in Massachusetts. This is an image of Back Bay today. And on the right side here, this distinctive building is the Prudential Tower, which to that area of Boston where there are a lot of meetings at, and it has an exposed aggregate in the concrete there, which is quartz, which came from the Ruggles mine in New Hampshire, which is a pretty famous uh, pegmatite mine uh, that one can collect mineral specimens in. So if you go to mineral shows with many geologists, you will see sometimes references to specimens from the Ruggles mine in New Hampshire. But a lot of that was also used for the surfacing of this particular building. So there was a lot of different import of material into the Boston area from interstate areas. The Of particular interest too is that the parking garage here contains rhyolite from the Row Quarry, which is mentioned later in this presentation, alkali reactive, so it's expanding and causing deterioration in the parking garage. Now I mentioned the Needham and Dedham sand and gravel pits, and there's a book out there by Holt in 2006, which goes into the whole mining process that occurred to supply sand and gravel for Back Bay. You can, it has the historic maps in it that you can actually relocate the lines and where things are. See this distinct right here? That's over here, and the areas over in this area where you can see there's residential development. These were lined for sand and gravel to supply material to Back Bay to fill it in. And I can guarantee you that people in this residential development have no idea that they're living on reclaimed land from aggregate mining from the war. The upper part up here, which is only in the edge of this here, this is the Charles River. As Elder can see, some of the are here's some of the here's the Charles River going through here, and this area up here was and this area here was also mine going over here. So there's some residential development, there's interstate development, interstate road. There's a lot of commercial development here, but see this when you drive up 95 if you're going up to New Hampshire or Maine, and you can see some distinct sign on the right. You do it electronics. And if you have a chance, you can pull out there and go in there. And then they have developed this area for commercial development over here. And you do it as a famous place for everybody who's a geek in New England, including just about everybody at MIT, to go and get electronics, resistors, even tubes, and to build new electronic equipment. That's the New England Industrial Park. Dedham, another area, very distinctive uh, rail lines, which you can see here. Here, this is Sprague Street going across here. It was mined over in here. And you can see this is all redeveloped after extraction of this. So this reclamation's been going on for quite a long time. Pre 1800 Civil War. There's also continued adaptive reuse in other parts of Mass. And here's one that is an old sand and gravel pit in Scituate. Scituate is south of Boston, and this material was trucked into Boston for Boston Sand and Gravel. Now, Boston Sand and Gravel had many plants. But they're really a producer in Massachusetts, and you may know Boston Sand and Gravel from this particular view, which is on the north side of Boston itself. And there's the Leonard's Aiken Bridge in the background there. But this particular plant has been in movies, and such as The Departed, The Talon with Affleck and Ava. So it's a famous area. Bring that material from Scituate anymore. They from Ossipee, New Hampshire, where they own thousands of acres up there. And that's kind of basically the current thing, is that a lot of these older plants were relatively small, less than 100 acres. Now, to get permitted, you need to own thousands of acres for aggregate production. Here's plant in Scituate, and some of this material that was brought to Boston by barge. Now, this is completely depleted here, and it's been adaptively reused into a golf course, kind of an important golf course. And the image on the right here is the best I can get one from an oblique view to an aerial view. But that's this area in here, of course, over here, and green areas have a golf course. So you have pre-existing glacial topography, which was mined and then adaptively reused by turning it into pseudo-glacial topography golf course. And golf courses, of course, come from Scotland, where you have a lot of glacial topography, which I think is kind of a funny way to think about it. Here's the golf called Widow's Walk in Scituate, and there's the layout. So it's golf course, and pretty significant for golf in the Scituate area and Massachusetts in general. Other views, a nice place. I'm going to switch to real Massachusetts quarries, and most of the ones I'm going to talk about here are these ones that I've outlined in red. Now, this is from an obscure book that was a series of presentations brought together by a guy named Farquhar in 1967. But it's kind of like the Bible for industrial minerals in Massachusetts. I understand Parker wanted to be the state geologist, so he did a lot of work there, and then it didn't work out for him to be state geologist. First, I'm going to talk about is blue, and this is the Roxbury pudding stone. It's the state rock in Massachusetts. It's a coarse conglomerate, and this is a conglomerate that you can see off the interstate, uh, where some of the rocks in the interstate road cuts are huge. I mean, they're talking a meter in diameter. Now, this particular image is the material that's about 2 to 3 in diameter in here, but it's been used extensively, and you can see it really in many parts of the country, but it's really most common in this Massachusetts. It's used as cut stone and rip. The AEG New England gavel for business meetings is used there, and there's also the Massachusetts Monument in Gettysburg. And the Roxbury pudding stone was quarried in hillside quarries, and here is a view, and you can see in the all this topography here, these cuts were multiple pits and quarries on this hillside, and you from the topography here. I'm going to show some images down here where this grocery store is a stop and shop and a park over here. But you can see there was quarry down here. So this is adaptively reused. But you can see from a geological on the upper right, the Roxbury conglomerate was alluvial fans and porcelain material as you get closer to what was the original mountain area, and then finer as you go out offshore. Also in here is this New England Baptist uh, hospital, and there's a lot of hospitals down here, and New England Baptist of the premier one for replacing hips and knees. Here's a close up of that area of the map, and like I said, I'm going to go where the stop and shop is. Oh, that's also, by the way, the area called Mission Hill. And Mission Hill, several years ago, was a big scandal where somebody uh, claimed that he was robbed and killed his wife and he jumped off the bridge. But that had national news, and if you're old enough, you may remember it. Here's some of the views after it's adaptively reused of a quarry in the Roxbury pudding stone. You can see that it's tastefully done, utilized then for the needs of the community with the grocery store and then a park and there on the upper right, and in basically the whole center of the image down in the bottom. We're going to switch up to the Rao Quarry, which is number 12 there. It has an off-center blue circle around it. Rao Quarry has distinctive aggregate in Massachusetts, and I can guarantee you if you identify any purple aggregate in quarry or in architectural stone for cutting down weeds, that's going to be from the Rao Quarry. It was very, very distinctive. It's a hillside quarry, and it has several developments in it. But there was a vertically integrated quarry, an old quarry, and one of the oldest ones around, where a lot of the construction with big wooden beams, and that's you can see a pretty true rendition, at least on my screen, of the color purple. Image of the plant at the Rao Quarry. There's another image. Third image, you can see the high wall in the back of this. Now, but most coming from there, which is a metarrhyolite, purple, but there's a small amount that's yellow too, and the yellow material is actually more reactive than the purple material. Here's a view from of the outcrops in the Ralph Quarry, and here's one of the developments, Overlook Ridge, and on this one you can see the high wall, and this is all in the floor quarry. So they had a hillside quarry that went to greater high wall over here, and this is Route 1, which is a major route, and goes all the way from Florida to Maine. And here it's going through Massachusetts. It's going right around the quarry. Here's the quarry stone prop and route prop, and each of sequential development used they had on site to make an entrance with some of the purple rock there because they appreciated it, and you can see that in the bottom left. Here's another image of the entrance and the building itself with a retaining wall and decorative use of the existing material. Now, these particular buildings were not built with concrete from the Rao quarry, but so they don't have the problems that could be associated with this alkali reactive rock type. Another view. We're very proud of the dramatic effect wall in the back. Another one chip right there. One famous architect that you may have heard of, I.M. Pye, really liked this particular. He specified it in his projects in the Boston area, and that led to other people who were copying his style and it to specify it too. But what's happened is because of this adherence to that was being specified in this particular quarry. There's the next quarry we're going to go to, mass broken stone quarries. That's at the right at the intersection, really, of the Mass Pike and the Fur Beltway 128 Boston, and it's at this Blue Circle area. Now, Mass Broken in Weston originally started out as Stony Brook or the Weston Quarry, and it was operated by the Robinsons. The Robinsons were very active in what was the National Crushed Stone Association back in the 60s. This is an old quarry. It started in 1901, but still before the First World War. But it's hard to actually rock to get onto the site now, but you will see these particular curbs around. This stone is about 2 inches across, and you will see these everywhere in the Boston suburb area. They embedded this rock to help market their material and to make these curbstones, which were used extensively, and they were shipped all across Massachusetts. It's a metagabbro, completely non-reactive, very durable rock, very good material. Also, like I said, an ancient operation. Here's some of the image I got online from around 1905, I think. So but this quarry has two pits in it, and these are deep. And in this particular image, the two that are flooded with lighter green water here. This over here is a big fen that is a recreation area now over here, and this is 128 right here, and this is a small road, Route 20 through West. Uh, these pits are deep; they're over 385 and 85 feet deep, so they're around 400 feet deep, and they flooded in the 60s, but available. Excuse me, they flooded in the 80s, and but they were adaptively reused after they flooded for a company called Biogen, which is a really high-tech company making biologics. This image, you see the pit, and you can note the spiraling haul road going down into it. Here they are after it's flooded, and here's Biogen. And the white stuff that you see on the pits is ice. This was in 2010. So everything gets cold there and freezes. The green stuff in the fen is, I don't know what it is, but it's out there, something growing in there. But Biogen, here's an image of the tube on the left oriented with the image on the right. So this is this pit up here, and here's this pit over here, and this is true north the way it's oriented, and this image was uh, oriented a different way, and I had rotated. This gives an explanation, but basically they're drawing water, cold water from the bottom, and using it to cool their biologic processes in their offices at Biogen. It's a pretty innovative setup, and my understanding is that it's quite well for them. Quincies are located with 13 on this map, where you got the blue circle down there, and they're next to the interstate there, which is 95, but indicated 28, let's call it. And they're also a very common material that's supplied across the United States and really across the world for stone. This was a coarser material. It's a gray Brooklyn granite. There are numerous quarries, but the one I'm going to focus on is right next to the interstate. And here, this was Colony Crushed Stone Company, and it was producing crushed stone for aggregate, and it was from this quarry in its early stages and from other quarries nearby, was shipped widely. There's this material, which is easily recognized, is present in Minneapolis and New Orleans, and there's the Quincy Quarries Reservation, which you can look up online. But this particular material is really tough, and it contains rebeckite, like curling stone, so that makes it a really tough material. But because of its coarser grain size, it was relatively easy to quarry and split and then to carve. This particular image is a guy named Currier, who is a relative of my ex-wife. But Old Colony, there's the Old Colony site in 1995. So it was not developed at that time. But this is the here. there's some development in what was the former area of the stockpiles and whatnot. There's a lot of development there, Harlem Healthcare, State Bank, Marriott Hotel. You can see because of the illumination of this, you can see a high wall where they placed the Interstate 93 right along the edge of the high wall. We're going to go to the Milford Pink stone quarries. Milford Pink was mined extensively for dimension stone, but and curbs do everything. It's a very durable material, and it's shipped nationally too. Not meet standard aggregate tests called the degradation because of its coarseness. So even though it withstood over 100 Massachusetts freeze-thaw winters in a severe environment, it can't be permitted to use as aggregate. But the sites can be redeveloped, and there's a quarry which is kept active over in Holliston, which is next to Milford, Mass. The Milford Pink, I consider, is very distinctive. This is what it looks like. It's clotted biotite, and I can irritate amounts of training them to recognize the Milford Pink granite anywhere in the country. But this clotted biotite, and but it was used in two phases of development for the Boston Public Library. For a big monument for First World War, the Great War, where they turned the material. So it's tough, and that's really high end processing of dimension stone to be able to make something like this and to actually have it completely perform throughout the years. It's also used for the Natural History Museum, if you will, but not the Smithsonian Building, but the Natural History Building. And I'm sure people in this presentation have been there, and they've seen the elements stuffed in the foyer. Quarry Square is an area in Milford that was redeveloped into mostly commercial buildings, but also some housing in that area. This is an image of this, and it's done by a person, Spafford Companies. Spafford's a big name right there, but not known much other parts of the country. Here's another indication of the reuse of that quarry. Other ones that are ongoing, and we're coming to the end of the talk. And there's Saugus, which is north of the city, and Saugus crushed stone is aggregates industry, and now Ashland crushed stone, same thing. Ashland is a place where I lived in Massachusetts, and that's this is Saugus up here. This is Ashland over here. This is Wex Roxbury crushed stone, and these particular ones are ongoing. The Saugus one is not done, nor is Ashland, but there's some things that are being done. This Roxbury crushed stone, which is SM LaRusso. There's two major asphalt producers in Massachusetts, and they're both LaRusso. These are the LaRussos that they call the cousins over here. There's where the Roxbury Quarry is. This is what Google Maps. This is what it looks like from Google Street View. And the particular material is denim granite and granodiorite, and it's got areas that are fresher as you go deeper, but there's also portions of it that are weathered and hydrothermally altered, which you can see in these images. Uh, Now, this operation is nearing the end of life, even though the owns a lot of this area, and but it's proposed, particularly at the time when the Big Dig was completed, that they fill the bottom and then use this for uses, which would probably be commercial development of some kind. And now people have the advantage of this particular fill would be dirt. Nobody really wants to put uh, garbage in these pits, and the advantage here would be that it would take the portion of the quarry that's susceptible to flooding and that from happening. Uh, but there's been a lot of opposition to this, and so there's been other things that have happened, and one of which is on the north side of this image. They've talked about running a gas pipeline, which is another hot button item, and there's been a lot of controversy about that. But I'd like to point out too that you have lots of trees around here, so this really is kind of a wildlife area. And I know that people hunt over in here, which is almost unheard of in this part of Massachusetts. But there's the Joyce Kilmer School up here, so and people have known about Joyce Kilmer home. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree, but it was not from Massachusetts, but he wrote poetry and then he volunteered for the first floor. He was killed by a sniper. But poetry that is controversial or you really love it. The That's the end of my presentation. I have a lot of citations in here, things that I've done work on and others too. And here's if you want to contact me, you do that. And I see a number of things commented in the chat. So I guess that I would try to answer some of the questions if there are
Steve, I want to thank you for an informative presentation. I really appreciate the time, energy, and effort you're giving to AIPG. I'm going to lead off by maybe putting you on the spot a little bit. One of the things you said early was that you have to own a lot more land now if you're going to permit a quarry or an aggregate operation. And I know you mentioned a couple of times that some of these operations are close to their end of life. So, with your experience and your knowledge of the history of this region, what does the future look like for aggregate production in Boston? Can you maybe give us a little synopsis of what we might expect to see happen in that area in the next, I don't know, 20 years?
Yes, Boston Sand and Gravel is operating in Ossipee, New Hampshire. They have their own captive rail line, which they bought to ship by rail from Ossipee, New Hampshire to Boston. So they basically are the major producer. The New England Governors Conference, the goal of the New England Governors Conference study was to see what the supply of aggregate could be to Boston in the future. And it concluded that there was a lot of sand and gravel around, and it wasn't going to be depleted in the future, for the foreseeable future, and that there was infinite rock reserves. And this study was done not by geologists, not by people involved in the mineral industry. And I had my own proprietary information. And where it was flawed with the sand and gravel is that they presumed that a deposit was going to be wholly owned by an individual or a company. And the land was broken up into multiple owners. So it was not, it did not cover the entire deposit. So if there was an operator who owned the sand and gravel, they were the only people who operated in the future because of the ownership issue. In addition, there's something is used throughout Mexico where they're protecting the groundwater, and the protection zone above the water level is 10 to 20 feet above the level of the water in a well there. Now you're to do that, you have to drill a well, and then you have to monitor it for a couple years to get that, to add 10 feet above it. And what that amounts to is that all the material is preempted requirement for protection of groundwater, whether there's any groundwater there or not. Now, the New England Governors Conference study, what it did was it had another flawed way that it went about it, in that it found the nearest USGS well, and it said that the thickness of sand and gravel was what was defined from the USGS well. And the USGS wells were not drilled in the Kings or Escrews; they were drilled in the lake beds. So they were flawed. Now, as far as infinite of of rock for crushed stone, yeah, there's a lot of rock for crushed stone, but you're not going to get it probably permitted near Boston. It could be brought in from rail from the rest of Massachusetts or New Hampshire. The gravel is in New Hampshire. Boston Sand and Gravel owns thousands of acres up there of sand and gravel, and they supply the other producers in the area. So there. So uh, if you've got the material now, business. If you don't have the material, you're not going to be in business. You might be able to set up quarries in Western Massachusetts and ship to to Boston. And I did a couple of to identify those sites, but um, permitting, you need to have really a couple thousand acres to be able to get a permit. The only side thing on that is have a small acreage that you produced over the years, you can be grandfathered in. There's only one operation like that in Massachusetts where they're grandfathered in, where they had an 80 acre property. Did that answer your question? I hope it did.
Absolutely. So Jack O'Leary has asked, he says Massachusetts DEP tries to treat water-filled old quarries as jurisdictional wetlands. They're clearly man-made. Some are hazards, kids diving in them, etc. And John Johnson chimed in and said, yeah, they're filled with water. They're a dangerous, attractive nuisance. The question is, how do you overcome, or do you have any thoughts on how to overcome this classification as jurisdictional wetlands?
Um, well, Quincy Quarries Reservation, what they did is they filled in that particular dimension stone operation up there where I and one of my friends used to go, and filled it in from the big dig, because there were always, as soon as somebody was murdered in Boston, the belief was that they were quarry. So then divers would have to go in the quarry and try to find the body. and they were pretty universally not successful. But uh, so the solution to that was to fill it in. Now that was owned by the state. It was able to get all the permits to fill in that operation, that old uh, property that they owned, uh, and fill it in, and to deal with the jurisdictional wetlands issue there. Now, the jurisdictional wetlands in Massachusetts are really kind of a issue. I lived in Ashland. One of the areas that the town of Ashland owned was their old swimming pool, old water. It was a below ground pool, but because of leaf litter collection, it was growing some uh, cattails in it, and that the presence of cattails was by definition a wetlands, and that cost a lot of money beyond that. And eventually, I just think it was just hardcore politics that allowed them to move the cattails and the old broken swimming pool used in a place for occasionally people would throw refrigerators as a wetland. The other things for that are jurisdictional wetlands would be with the cranberry, particularly the ones where you're making them further south in Massachusetts, and the way that these are not classified as jurisdictional wetlands is because they're classified as farmland. So there's almost no permitting requirements to make a made cranberry bog in Massachusetts. So because it's farmland. So that is essentially one way that the jurisdictional wetlands fee is over by having the land be developed as a cranberry bog. I think I've answered that question. What's the
Yeah, I
next
think
one?
we have time for two more, I think. One of them from Michael Adkins, who says, is there any potential for underground quarry operations as they do with limestone in Kentucky? I would also add, limestone in Sugar Creek, Missouri, right outside Kansas City in the Midwest. I think we see a lot of underground limestone mining, but is there any potential for underground production in Boston?
There's limestone in Boston. This is really little known. Most of the marble, though, is in western Massachusetts, and some of it was mined underground. The with that said, uh, nothing really in Boston, and the marble has has a relatively high level of degradation for for being used as aggregate. Now, the largest mining operation in Massachusetts, in North Adams, and that's cool. And and that was classified in the governor's conference study as being the biggest quarry in essentially all of New England. Uh, that was false because they only produced 30,000 tons per year, which is minuscule as aggregate, but they produce 1 million tons per year as mineral filler, which is an industrial mineral and used for plastics, etc. So I don't think that's more valuable than aggregate. It's far west of Ball, so it's not likely to be a realistic source for for going to Boston. There's other bedrock sources and property that rail that could feed Boston from Western Massachusetts.
Okay. And our last question is from Christopher Mata. Christopher writes, quarries, especially sand and gravel pits, sometimes tend to become a recycling facility, which may in turn have become waste sites or even Superfund sites. Has the greater Boston area escaped this fate?
Pretty much. But I know I did a lot of work in Maryland at a place called Allender Road, and that was a sand and gravel pit that then after all the sand and gravel was extracted, the state of Maryland took over and turned it into a hazardous waste site because it wasn't a hazardous waste site before, but they used unlined bins to collect hazardous material that then leaked into the very permeable sand and gravel on that site. But there's one of the advantages you have in New England is that you have till a lot of that is really almost impermeable, and there's also this Boston uh, blue, and that's in landfills as daily cover, and it really helps to keep any pollutant normal municipal and other waste from entering the groundwater and draining off. So I think there's a greater supply of material and daily cover in the Massachusetts area. So that helps it avoid the hazardous waste sites.
Okay. Just very quickly, everyone, the link to the quiz is up. So if you're seeking CEUs for your registration in New York State, you want to make sure you get that taken. We did see some people who are having some time conflicts, so we're going to keep that open until 3:30 Eastern. And then Steve, the very last thing, Russ Patterson stated in a comment that he asked if you noticed the granite cross ties on some of the old rails exiting some of the quarries. And it put me in mind of the fence post limestone out in Kansas, where a lot of the fences that you'll see out there use posts made out of limestone because it was so difficult to get uh, decent quality wood for fence posts. So I just found that interesting and wonder if you'd noticed that they sometimes use stone as cross ties in the rail.
The original quarry in the Quincy granite, which is now Quincy, what's it? Is it a national, maybe a park? But any case, those are granite cross ties there. The particular rail line was longer than it is now, but those are cut stone Quincy granite cross ties. But
Well, I found that really interesting. That sort of alternate use of stone, something we don't usually think of.
okay.
Well, I want to thank you for your time. We've gone just a little bit longer than is typical. I appreciate everyone who came in today. Again, make certain if you're seeking CEUs for New York State that you get that quiz completed. You do need to get 4 out of 5 correct, but you can take that as many times as you like. And the link is in the chat. Actually, I think Wendy's placed it in there a couple of different times. So make sure that you take care of that. Steve, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your expertise with our audience here for the AIPG Lunch and Earn. So thank you very much.